Hey guys, welcome to today's video. So today I'm joined by a wonderful guest, Stefano.
Hi.
And Stefano has his own YouTube channel and IG, and he's also has his own italki account where he teaches, I think, is it Italian and Finnish on italki?
And German.
And German, and German on italki. And he's learned a bunch of languages to a really high level. And we actually met at some polyglot event before run by Ollie Richards in Berlin, I think a few years ago now, maybe like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And we finally got around to creating a video, so I'm really happy to have Stefano on the channel to talk about languages. So, yeah, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself
Yeah, sure.
for
Hi.
those who
Hi,
might not
everybody.
already know you?
Yeah, so my name is Stefano. I'm Italian, but I've been living in Belgium, Brussels, for about 10 years now. My background is actually translation and interpretation. So I've worked as a freelance translator for about 20 years already. Wow. But but for about 3 years, I also have worked as a tutor, as Luke said, as a tutor, language tutor online on italki, mainly for several languages. And I've also uploaded some language-related videos on my YouTube channel, linguaEpassione. That's language and passion, because I'm
Yeah,
passionate about language. That's pretty much the meaning of that. And yeah, that's it. I've always loved foreign languages since I was small, and yeah, I've always learned multiple languages at the same time. And it's really what interests me is mostly the fun of the the learning process, rather than focusing too much on the results, on getting
yeah,
results quickly. I'm more interested in uh, the joy, the joy that you get out of learning and then using and consuming content in other languages.
yeah. I can
That's
certainly relate a lot to that because it takes so long. I guess you can't be too focused on results because when it takes longer than you expect to get there, you'll just get frustrated.
it's always going to
Yeah,
take longer than you think, and you're always going to find things that you don't know. So uh,
even
it's
in
a
my
never,
English,
it's
yeah,
a never-ending, yeah, it's a never-ending process, really. So you might as well sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. That's pretty much my philosophy.
yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, I mean, I really agree with like everything you just said. But so we've got a few topics lined up for today. I'm just looking at what I've just written on the side here. So one thing I wanted to talk about to start off is one of the languages that Stefano has learned to a very high level is Finnish, to the point where he's actually started teaching Finnish as an italki tutor online. So I mean, first I'm a bit curious really because at least I don't know many people, at least in the European circle, who have got into learning Finnish. So I'm a bit curious, kind of what sparked your interest in the first place.
Yeah, so the very first thing that interested me so much in about Finnish was its grammar. I was looking for a yeah,
It's
yeah,
such a
but
language nerd's answer.
that's because I was looking. I had already learned English, German, and Portuguese, and I was actually already working as a translator.
Mhm.
So I had those three languages pretty strong, strongly in my pocket, and I was looking for a completely new challenge, a big one. And I
Mhm.
had read somewhere that Finnish was considered as at least one of the most difficult languages in the world, or more distant, most distant, and that its grammar was particularly complex. Okay, so I looked a little bit into the grammar, and I saw, oh wow, 15 cases. I had learned German. German has 4 cases, so I was really curious. It was a matter of curiosity, maybe. Um, I was curious to know how you actually use 15 cases in everyday speech. So I started looking into that, and then it snowballed because I started I started liking the sound of it, really. I would say falling in love, really,
Mm.
with the sound of it, and comparing it. It was for me as if it sounded to me as the language of the elves, so something so
Yeah,
so mysterious. And well, then it was a matter of a challenge to crack the code and uh,
yeah.
becoming able to actually understand the elves and
I,
using it
yeah.
myself.
I understand what you mean when you say like the more you listen, the more you kind of just almost getting. I mean, it doesn't happen with every language, but for some, like you almost get like pulled in more, and you get like more enchanted by the sounds. So
Yeah.
I remember when I first started learning Mandarin, I always preferred the Taiwanese sort of accent and pronunciation. But then, like more recently, a few months ago, I started, and when I first started, I didn't like how people in Beijing spoke. I thought it was too harsh. I thought it was too rough.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a few months ago, I started listening to some stuff from Beijing and more things from there. And, when I put the subtitles, Chinese subtitles in the bottom, I can understand what they're saying if I read and listen at the same time.
Oh.
And I actually started to be like, oh, actually, this sounds quite cool now. And like, I don't know, it's just something before, because I guess I got so used to Taiwanese, and that became like the normal one for me. And then after that, like this Beijing accent kind of sounded more edgy, more cool, a bit more harsh and different. So it's kind of just I just started liking that now, and even like I start like trying to like impersonate it and do some of the accents and stuff sometimes with some of my friends. So I understand how you kind of get more like attracted by some of these
Isn't
sounds
it like
before you listen
food?
to them.
Sometimes you start,
Yeah.
you try your food for the first time, and you go, this is not really my cup of tea. And then 3 times, 4 times after that, you
Yeah,
start liking it, and then it becomes your main your main love, your main food. So
and that's what basically happened to me with Indian food. So yeah.
you see, it happened to me with sushi. I hated it the
Uh,
first time, and the second and the third one, but from the fourth
for that.
time on, it's only sushi now.
Addicted. Cool, cool. So I'm kind of curious then. So from and I'll go dive a little bit into more detail in a second,
Oh.
but in like from an overall picture from when you started learning Finnish to the point where you can actually like start teaching people Finnish on italki and things like that. I'm guessing quite a few years must have passed. Like, how long did that take you?
So to become actually fluent to the point where you know that the minute you or the moment you suddenly realize, hey man, I can speak this language, and I can function in this language. It took me 4 to 5 years.
Oh wow. Okay.
Okay, so
I
it took me about 2 years of really going deep into the grammar, because I went the other way around. I wouldn't recommend to start from grammar, but at that moment in time, that particular moment, it was the thing that I wanted to learn about Finnish. It was the thing that
that was
interested
the
me
thing
about.
you were curious about. Yeah.
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 That's why I started from grammar. But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because I was then able to relatively quickly build upon the strong foundation that I had created.
Yeah.
Maybe it wouldn't have been so. I'm not saying easy, because it was not easy, but it wouldn't have been so comfortable for me to actually build up vocabulary on a weak grammar foundation. So that helped me. Maybe the first 6 months, I would guess, of only grammar helped me build up vocabulary later much easier, because Finnish is such a language where if you hear or learn a new word, you cannot really use it. You cannot really put it into practice without knowing how to change it, because you change a word depending on where it is in the sentence, or what its role is in the sentence. Okay.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Sounds very confusing.
It's a bit confusing, yeah, but then when you are in it, it's actually, it becomes
more natural, I suppose. The more you
more
get
natural, more logical as well. It's a pretty logical language. That helps.
I think it just reminded me of something then. I did a chat. So at the time, he was part of, there was something called MIA, which was run by these two guys, Matt versus Japan and Lucas, who has another channel called Immerse with Yoga. They've split up MIA now, but I did a video with Lucas before. His channel, I think, now is called Immerse with Yoga, and he has learned a few languages, and he says he always likes to start with the grammar. He gets a good grammar book, gets example sentences for all of them, puts them into Anki, and just learns all the different grammar structures. And then he says from that point, he has a skeleton of a language in his head, and all he needs to do is just expose himself and like fill in the gaps in the vocabulary.
Fill in the gaps,
and it's
exactly.
just more natural from there to progress. There's no like big barriers. It's just a case of keep on like plugging away, sort of thing.
It's about replacing words. In you have your own patterns. I call them patterns. I don't like to call them rules, but you have your grammar patterns, and then you just. It's not easy, but okay. you just you simply replace the words, and you can express a lot of things that you wouldn't have thought possible.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
So I was saying about 2 years. I would say for an intermediate level where you kind of when you get you become able to. Well, I became able to express myself and to understand people who were willing to speak.
And how long were you doing? How much time were you putting in every day at that point?
It's
Do you
really
remember?
difficult to say. Sometimes just 10 minutes before going to bed, I would I would fall asleep with my grammar book in my hands. So sometimes it was just the 10 minutes, but I think it helped still, because I kind of have a feeling that when you sleep, your brain keeps reworking the things that you've just read or experienced. So the following day, I was remembering quite a lot of those 10 minutes.
I've heard similar things. I think there's an e-course called Learning How to Learn from a woman called Barbara Oakley who talks about how your brain switches between these two modes. And like, you know, if it's in the focus mode and you're trying to like really concentrate on something, you can zoom in on an answer, you get stuck. But then if you let your brain relax, you're like kind of almost inside your brain. It's almost a lot more sparse, so it's free to like bounce around and explore the different parts of your brain's like past memories and experiences and things. So it can actually travel a lot more on your brain. And then when you're relaxing, like going for a walk or sleeping, suddenly you just, I understand this better now, and it's just because it's like doing stuff in the background the whole time.
Yeah, isn't it the reason why many people say you shouldn't cram stuff just the day before the exam, and just take the last day off instead of cramming on exactly.
Get an early night's sleep.
Sorry?
I think that's also so you're not super sleepy for the exam and then just fail. Yeah, maybe. Okay, cool. So that was like, so you said it was sometimes it was 10 minutes before you went to bed, or was it on average 10 minutes? And then was that for the first 6 months only, or for the whole 2 years? You said was going at that sort of speed.
I can't tell you with confidence. I would use. I could say maybe on average, half an hour a day on average. It's really not much, but if you do it every day,
over 2 years,
it helps a lot. And of course, some days I would skip, and some other days I would go 2 hours, or 3 hours, whatever. I've always gone with the flow. Okay, so I've always done what I felt like. This is so important. I really have the feeling I don't know whether I'm the only one who works like that, but if I have fun doing something, I know I can learn.
Yeah.
If I don't have fun, I don't really learn much. And so I stopped doing stuff that I don't like to do.
Yeah, I really relate to that a lot. Most of my learning now is reading and watching stuff I like. I'm watching a TV show about Bruce Lee. I love Bruce Lee as a poster in the background.
Love it.
And just reading on my Kindle. Like I've got this here. I'm reading a book called Atomic Habits in Chinese. It's super interesting. So I actually, a lot of the time I go, okay, I'm going to sit down and read for an hour, and then I read for an hour and a half just because I want to keep reading.
Does it happen to you that you sit down in order to read for an hour and you read only 15 minutes because you want to quit? You're not having fun. Does it happen as well?
So sometimes I get like distracted or feel like I'm a bit restless, and in that point normally, because I do it in the morning, so if I feel like I'm losing concentration, I normally like put my Kindle down, go like brush my teeth, and then after I finish I go back and start reading again, and that little break tends to help me
restart. Yeah.
Okay. Or like maybe sometimes just like just walk around the house or like wash up some bowls from breakfast or something, just something to like put my mind off it for 5 minutes and come back, and then later it.
I do that as well. Especially the washing up thing.
It's a good way to kind of split it up and also not lose time, because you're still not just staring out the window for 5 minutes. Because it's busy for me in the morning.
And I do that with these on, so I'm maybe listening to some nice voice telling me. story.
Not to get too far off topic, but there's
Yeah.
actually quite a famous. Have you heard of Taoism? It's a Chinese philosophy. So there's two. I think there's the two main ones. There's the Confucianism, which is the one that's become more popular now, and it's got loads of Confucius institutes all over China and America and stuff. But one of the other ones, Taoism, it's a religion and a philosophy. And one of the famous guys who had books early on, I think his name is in Chinese Zhuangzi, and he had a lot of stories about how you need to go with your natural tendencies and go with the flow, go with what you like, and don't try to turn yourself into something you're not. And he used the metaphor of there's this crooked tree, and the one guy was complaining, saying, this tree is no use to turn into lumber. It's no use. It's crooked. It's the quality of wood's really bad. And then Zhuangzi said, it's because you're trying to turn it into something it's not. Compared to all the other trees, it's slanted, so you can use it to rest in the shade, or you can just look at its rustic beauty and just appreciate it. So there's no need to try to turn it into something it's not. You could just use it for what it is.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I actually read that at the start of Steve Kaufman's book, which is also really interesting. Okay, so you did that for about 2 years, and then from that point of roughly half an hour a day, or on average maybe.
Yeah.
After about 2 years or so, you got to the point when you can kind of have comfortable conversations on probably a variety of topics.
Exactly. But
maybe struggled with some more complicated ones, or could you kind of converse on more or less everything?
More or less everything, I would say, staying on the surface. The point is, I was able to express myself pretty well, but understanding people, speaking spoken Finnish, of course, like everyday colloquial Finnish, was truly a nightmare, because Finnish is it has one more level of complexity, and that is that the way you talk is not the same way you write. Okay. So it's very different. So I was able to express myself, but if the other person was not willing to use written Finnish or standard Finnish with me, I would be in trouble. So it took me 2 more years to kind of become really fluent on both variants.
That's made me really curious then. So you say formal Finnish is very, very different from spoken Finnish, like colloquial stuff, what people speak to from day to day. So the thing I'm wondering is, can you write down colloquial Finnish as it's spoken? So for
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm assuming if you were to text someone or maybe subtitles for a YouTube video, you can get access to a lot of that colloquial stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But it probably wouldn't necessarily be used for newspapers and books and things like that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's also not easy to find actual learning material in puhekieli, which is the spoken version. So the problem that many learners of Finnish are facing typically is that they are learning the standard Finnish, obviously, but then they are faced with a completely different reality, and that puts anyone off, and then they just leave it and just say, okay, then I won't learn Finnish anymore. So it's a little bit also my plan for the future to actually develop, if possible, some kind of material, courses, etc., for real spoken Finnish, because I think that's a big there's a void in the market, if you will. Yeah.
That just made me think of something. I think that sounds quite similar to some of the problems that Cantonese have. So, and the thing is, because they have, whenever they write down subtitles, they've used the standard form of Chinese, which is completely different to how it's spoken. But in the movie and the YouTube or whatever they're watching, they still speak colloquial, but they put the formal subtitles over the top. So actually, in the majority of media for Cantonese, what they're saying and what the subtitles are completely different.
Wow.
Which is can be pretty confusing. But there's a polyglot called Ollie Richards, which obviously I've seen your Italian video with him.
Yeah.
And he created a course called Cantonese Conversation. So what he did is he paid loads of people from Hong Kong come together, record about 30 or so conversations, each about 5 minutes long, and just transcribe word for word what they said. And for me at the time, considering this was something that I found really hard to find, was like an absolute godsend. It was so useful. Just having actually word for word what they said, not the formal written Chinese or anything like that. It's just what's actually being said, and it's colloquial, everyday
Yeah,
language, and that
real.
was really useful. So,
Yeah.
if there's a market for it, I'm sure loads of people would really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Also, so maybe after those 2 years, so how long was it until you started teaching Finnish?
Well, it took a long time because I didn't know about italki yet. So it was only when I discovered italki that I started teaching on it. So it's been just 3 years. But in the meantime, I've continued building up my vocabulary. I stopped really, studying the language. I've just
Started like enjoying it.
like cramming stuff or actively looking for explanations, looking for grammar, because I had kind of covered almost everything, and I just kept using the language, talking with my friends. I also found the person that became my wife, and she's a Finn, so it's I've been using the language and listening to the language every single day of my life. So when this italki opportunity came up, I thought, why not? Let's do it.
Wow.
And I discovered that I prefer teaching or tutoring to translation, which is pretty interesting.
I guess there's a lot more social interaction involved, and you
Yeah.
seem quite a person who likes to be around people and quite chatty.
Yes, and you also have the feeling that you're helping people so directly. You can see it on the students' face at the end of the lesson that they are happy and thankful and so on. So it's really great.
Wasn't it really nice, yeah, seeing someone going from maybe only being able to say one or two words, then eventually having like full-blown conversations with you must be like really rewarding thing to see.
It is for them and it is for me.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify one thing. You said 3 years. Was that 3 years after the 2 years, which would be 5 years total, or kind of 3 years total?
On italki, you mean?
Yeah, you said you learnt for about 2 years and got to this comfortable stage, and then you said it
And
was
then
3 years until italki. You mean after the 2 years?
no. After the
Or
2 years,
total?
I had 2 more years learning the spoken language and getting from intermediate to advanced. And then lots of years passed before I found italki. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But that was it. I was not studying the language anymore. I was just absorbing more vocabulary from my interactions with people, and I mean actually the best way to learn a language is using it, enjoying contents and reading books. I also translated a novel
Oh,
from
wow.
Finnish into Italian in the meantime. Yeah.
So is there quite a lot of literature out there for Finland, and is there quite a lot of literature there in Finnish?
I think so. Yeah. There's
Oh, wow, cool.
there's a lot of interesting stuff out there.
It's not something I've ever explored myself, but you never know. Maybe in 10 years' time or whatever.
Well,
Okay,
you
cool.
have translations. Thanks to translators, you can enjoy Finnish literature.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's been quite a lot of stuff translated from there to English, so that's one of the benefits to having English as your native language. Is a lot of stuff can get translated too.
Yeah.
Although I guess sometimes the translations aren't that accurate. Like I know, I think there's one book series I really wanted to read called The Witcher. I think it's originally Polish, and I've heard people complain about saying that the English translations are awful compared to the original Polish. So, it's just sometimes like that. It's hard to like. Sometimes it's really hard to translate the original feeling and essence of what's being said, and it just doesn't convert well to other languages.
Yeah, it's a profession that requires a lot of time and a lot of practice and
It's
concentration.
almost like its own art form, I guess.
Yes, it is. It is actually. You also, I'm going to defend the translator, obviously, because it's from the same category. But sometimes you also get put into a lot of pressure, especially time pressure, so that the quality of the work really it can only be so good as it can be.
Yeah. And I've heard people say, they if they would have the time, they'd want to spend like, hours on like a single sentence, but the company's just like, come on, you need to actually produce some work here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So cool. So that's really quite interesting then. So I guess also as well, one of the recent projects that you've been working on recently is you've been learning Georgian, and I think you've got videos all about that on your channel, and that's
Yep.
also quite a not one that's too common for English speakers to try and learn, I guess, or Italian speakers to try and learn, probably the same. So what got you
Exactly.
into Georgian?
That's a long story too. It started 20 years ago. I met a very special person, a friend, very good friend of mine in Germany, and she is from Georgia, of course, and we just got along so well together, and I kind of discovered this language and especially this culture through her, and she was kind of it was almost a joke, but I learned the alphabet with her and the numbers,
Mm.
simple words such as thank you and goodbye, stuff like that. And then I kind of made a promise to her that that I one day I would learn Georgian, and she was like, "Yeah, sure." So last year, all of a sudden, I started learning Georgian without telling her, as a secret, as a small surprise, just because I'm planning to go to Georgia actually in a couple of years or 3 years maximum, when we hopefully can travel again.
Fingers
Um,
crossed.
yeah, fingers crossed, exactly. Uh, and I would like to be able to use the language there. I don't speak Russian. I'm not planning on learning Russian. So I want it to be the only language for communication for me when I am there, when I'm gonna be there. And yeah, so I started last year, and actually recently I had a conversation with her, and I revealed to her that I was learning Georgian in Georgian, and I recorded it, and it's going to be on my channel next week.
Oh wow.
She was
I've got to
quite
check that out.
surprised.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Happily so. Yeah, that's a little bit the story. The funny thing is, it's amazing how much of the alphabet and especially of the numbers I still remembered after 20 years.
Oh wow. So you met her in Germany 20 years ago, and then you've only just got around to it now.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
amazing. So
yeah.
that I was thinking, maybe like 1 or 2 years ago you met her, then now you just started. But I guess now because it's been so long, it would have been such a big surprise. Like, oh, you finally started doing it. Wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I can imagine the shock as well.
yeah.
That's
And now
amazing.
now she's actually helping me. We are texting. We are using WhatsApp in Georgian. So obviously she has to be patient with me because I don't know all the words. But it's fun. It's fun. As I told you, it's fun. As long as it's fun, it's cool.
And just keep
When,
going, yeah.
yeah,
And if
when
you
it
have
stops
enough,
being
then
fun,
just do
I
something
usually.
else.
Sorry?
And if it stops being fun, just do something else for a little bit.
Uh, So, can I show you the alphabet? Because I think it's
Yeah, of
amazing.
course. Well, I think the first one's a three. It looks like. So,
Yeah, it does. It does look like that.
I've got one of them now, and yeah, let's
There's one that
quite
looks like an ice cream.
I think there was one that looks a little bit like the letter B as well and stuff. I'm trying to have a
Yeah. Also, and there's an H or fake H. There's quite a lot of interesting stuff. But yeah, I mean the alphabet, the beauty of it also attracted me so much about this language. The way it sounds, it's really it sounds so impossible that again I was really curious whether or not I would be able to crack the code.
yeah.
And suddenly being able to actually understand what comes out of that salad of consonants.
I can definitely relate to that. Some probably the same for you with things like Japanese kanji. You just look at it and think it just looks like squiggly lines, and you look at it and you think I'm never going to understand that. But then when you actually like read like or like you're listening to something and you understand that first line of a movie, or you read that first text or that first chapter of a book or something. It's just such a cool like motivation. You're like, whoa, I can actually do this. That's such
Exactly.
a
It's
nice
it's a
feeling.
reward
Mm,
and extra motivation at the same time, right? The reward
yeah,
is also motivation to keep going and discovering more. And you mentioned the kanji, and isn't it amazing how those little things convey so much meaning?
hmm
But as you said,
yeah,
it's just scribbles. It's
yeah.
amazing. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's something that confused me a lot at the start. I'm assuming it's the same for Japanese as Chinese, but you have like one character, and depending on the context, it could mean so many things. And you've got to look at what characters it's with, or even sometimes single character words change the pronunciation
Exactly.
and or like the tone and like the meaning depending on where it is. So like one of the examples is way in Chinese, like 为什么. The way in that it was way. It's if it's second or fourth tone, it changes what it means, and you have to just look to the left and right at what's in the sentence. So sometimes you read it and get to the end of the sentence, you go, oh wait, I just read that wrong, and have to go back to the start again and read it again. You know.
This is
Um,
something that happens with kanji and hanzi,
yeah,
but that doesn't happen with our alphabet or alphabets like the Georgian
yeah,
one, because there, every single symbol represents a sound, or a group of symbols represents a sound, whereas in Chinese and Japanese, there's no sound in there actually, or
mm,
very rarely.
yeah,
What you have is the meaning, and the meaning changes depending on the context, which is really, it's, I don't know, it's fascinating the minute you realize that you got to the point where you understand,
yeah.
So
And
wow, the first time you hear about it, you go, this won't be possible, but then it is possible. You just kept going, and
yeah.
one day it's possible.
And like I think the more you get comfortable with it, there's been times where I've this happens a lot more with reading than listening. Very rarely with listening, but if I see a word and I know the characters inside it, sometimes I could see it in the first time and know what it means. And even there's been some cases when I see like a Chengyu and I look at the characters and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't have to look that up because I know the characters and whatever. So you just don't have to, you know, look
Yeah,
it up. And then you just think like
it's
that
the
that would
ability to
happen.
understand,
Yeah.
what's written without being able to read it aloud, isn't it? Wow, it's incredible from a standpoint of a European person,
Yeah. But
right?
I think that would be more of a problem with Japanese because I think the pronunciation in Chinese changes a lot less. Most of the characters are kind of pronounced the same.
Yeah.
There's obviously exceptions, but like the majority of them, the pronunciation doesn't change too much.
Whereas in Japanese, it's the standard.
Yeah,
When you have
that's
a
what I've seen.
compound word, the sounds are different than when those same words are standing alone.
Yeah, I've heard that's really confusing with like people's names. So you have characters that you know how to read in some context, but it's in someone's name, and you're like, I don't know how to read your name. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
um, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it
Yes.
is.
So, how long have you been going with your Georgian now?
It's about 1 year and maybe a couple of months. Yeah,
Okay, nice, nice. And that's just going to be kind of continuing for the near future, right? For the foreseeable
absolutely.
future, is it?
Yes. I'm actually currently learning only Georgian,
Hmm.
and trying to maintain the other languages at the same time, obviously. But I'm not focusing on multiple languages, like really studying
Hmm.
multiple languages. I'm only focusing on Georgian, also for lack of time. But yeah, so it's my current project, and I hope to be able to develop some good knowledge in the
Hmm.
next couple of years.
One thing that I really like about your personality or just the way that you go about things, you see so many people on here that are just kind of like, I'm going to learn Japanese for 1 year, then I'm going to learn Georgian for 6 months, then I'm going to do Chinese for a year, and you just kind of they try to like micro plan everything else, and you're a lot more just kind of like in the moment. You're saying, you know what, I'm learning Georgian now. It'll take however long it takes. I'm just going to enjoy the process and just keep going. And I think that is I think that's I mean the results speak for themselves. You speak way
Thanks.
more languages than I do, so I think
Mhm.
that's just amazing. Yeah, and I really like that sort of attitude towards it.
Yeah, great.
Okay, cool. So I think one of the other things you said you wanted to talk about as well a little bit is with like difference between word lengths. So
Yeah.
for example, some of the languages you speak very well are Finnish and German, and some other languages that you said you've learned a little bit of is, for example, Mandarin Chinese.
Yeah.
And if you compare the word length in the two, then we
Also
said
Japanese. You can add Japanese to the mix as well as shorter
words. Yeah, that it's just completely different. So I guess you wanted to explore how that affects the learning and stuff.
Yeah, I have kind of a theory that if a language has longer words, I have less of a difficult time understanding, like listening and understanding spoken the spoken language, because it's as if I had more time to take in the words and to process them, whereas in a language like Mandarin, as you know, and even in Japanese, it took me such a long time, years and years, before I was able to even understand a very simple conversation. And only when I started really, I was able to understand spoken German and spoken Finnish, obviously not the spoken, not the spoken Finnish, not the puhekieli, but the dialogues in the books and all that stuff, based on standard Finnish. I was able to understand spoken standard Finnish only by learning from books, okay? And the same happened with German at school. I was able to understand the dialogues, etc., only by learning in a very classic way at school, the way of learning that usually nobody can learn with, But that didn't happen for Japanese, and I think it's because there's so much more information in a shorter like length of speech.
Yeah.
It's as if I wouldn't be able to process so much information in a short time, whereas languages with longer words give me more time to understand, right? Pretty simply. You know what I mean?
I can certainly relate to that. I think I didn't have as much experience learning as different languages as you, but I did learn a little bit of Spanish for like a period of 6 months. So if I contrast that with when I was first starting to learn Cantonese, if I like learnt a word or saw a word somewhere, I can, in Spanish, I can start hearing it everywhere. Whereas sometimes I learn a word in my textbook for Cantonese. I've tried to watch a TV show, and I don't even realize that the word I learnt's just come up. It's just completely flown over my head.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like months later, I was just start seeing these same things again and be like, oh, that was that? Really? Okay. I just completely missed that, and it's all of the, I think especially for like Chinese languages in the Chinese family, like Cantonese and Mandarin, the sounds are so short. It's just like duh, 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 duh. So you just take like a very short sentence, like if you say like I'm English, and it's just duh, 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 duh. And it just sounds so much like
it's 1 second, my friend.
Yeah.
1 second.
And
whereas
then you miss
Finnish,
it.
that would take 5 seconds.
Whereas if
Minä olen englantilainen. I mean, it's you have some time to actually process that.
So I think that's kind of how dense, how it almost kind of affects like how dense the language. So
density, that's a word. Thank you. Density, yeah.
So I think there's a lot more for your brain to process in like a shorter space of time, which I find really hard, and it's still something that I do struggle with from time to time. And if I take Mandarin for an example, one thing that people always say is like, oh, the characters are so hard. You must really struggle. Like, oh, your listening must be way better than your reading. My reading is way better than my listening. It's the other way around.
Wow.
I find reading a lot easier than listening because it's just so it goes so quick, and especially like with more colloquial Chinese and stuff, or like most TV shows and movies and things, I'm generally kind of okay. But if you go to very formal Chinese, a lot of these words in spoken Chinese are 2 characters, so you can generally tell from the context. Like yi jing is like already, but if you switch to formal Chinese, that just goes to yi, and they drop the second character. So you get loads of words like that suddenly half in length, and then it kind of
even more,
There's
even
these,
more
yeah,
dense.
like my brain just can't process it in time. And I think partly it's like you said, because you have less time to react and generally information is going quicker. There's more possibilities because there's a lot of cognates in Chinese. But also, I just think it's a fact of I very rarely listen to that form of Chinese, whereas I've spent
Mm.
hundreds, if not thousands, of hours listening to this more colloquial one. So I think some of it is just getting used to it. But yeah, I definitely understand that the pain sometimes of trying to understand.
So maybe it's also a personality thing because as a translator, in the
Mhm.
translation and interpretation world, there are two main, figures. There's the translator and the interpreter. The
Mhm.
translator writes, translates written stuff, written
Yeah,
texts, whatever, manuals and books, etc. The interpreter speaks,
yeah,
and the translator usually has to be more accurate and has more time to think
hmm
because he has to be more accurate. Okay,
hmm
whereas the interpreter can go with the flow a little bit and just get the message across, you know. But they have
you have no time.
like no time at all,
Yeah.
almost, right? Okay. So I'm a translator, and that reflects my personality. And I like to have time to process process things, to think over. Uh, and I think that has to be with personality as well, at least to a certain degree.
Okay, yeah. So you said you faced these challenges. So I think I can agree with you that at least based on contrasting my experience learning Cantonese, Mandarin, and Spanish, I think that it was definitely a lot harder to improve my listening for those for
Mhm.
Cantonese and Mandarin. Um, so when you were learning Japanese, you said they also have a lot of short words. And you said now you've kind of got to the point where you can have conversations with
Yeah,
people and understands like more things around you. So what
absolutely.
what was the like breaking point? What was the thing like? What did you do to kind of like bridge the gap, so to speak?
It was the day I decided to actually learn to speak Japanese, instead of just continuing learning Japanese from textbooks.
Hmm
I went on italki and I looked for language partners, and I started producing the language actually with someone,
hmm
which is pretty obvious nowadays, but for me, it was not that obvious back then. And yeah, so I started actually using the language instead of just learning about the language in textbook. You know what I mean?
hmm
Um, so slowly, well, I kept going. I kept going with multiple language partners, and then I also started using tutors, paid tutors. Uh, that got me going, and suddenly I was speaking Japanese. I was understanding spoken Japanese. It was great, but.
So, but before that point when you started on italki, I guess all of your is it correct to say all of your exposure to Japanese before that point is from materials made for learners like textbooks and apps and stuff like
Pretty
that?
much. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So, do you think it was? I guess because in my head now there's two possibilities to why that would have helped. The first is that if you produce something yourself, you're going to be more in tune to like receiving it and picking up that knowledge. So, for example, you could say writing out the new characters in Georgian might have helped you with your reading ability and helped you to get used to the characters and stuff like that. Or the other possibility, potentially, and maybe it's a combination of both of these, is that before that point you didn't listen to any kind of contemporary colloquial Japanese, whereas now you're actually spending a lot of time listening to real people speaking. So I
Yes.
guess I'm wondering is the benefits coming from purely speaking, or do you think maybe that you could have get some similar benefits by also starting to watch like YouTube videos and like more kind of colloquial content and stuff like that as well?
I think it's both because I believe that. I mean, I've never done it really like
Hmm
focusing 100% only on listening and reading. I've never done it because I like speaking so much.
Yeah.
I like producing the language so much. But I really feel that when I have used some expressions a couple of times
hmm
in actual conversations, my brain understands that that one's important and
hmm
is keeping it, storing it in the memory.
Yeah.
I can really feel that I'm doing it literally right now with Georgian, the expressions that I use the most with my tutors are the only ones that I can say I know.
Hmm.
All the other ones are washed away very, very quickly
Yeah.
because Georgian is such a different. It's not like another Romance language. I'm Italian, obviously, so where you can kind of guess what the meaning is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a mixture of the two.
So you think, would it be correct to say that you think kind of like speaking, because you get used to the sounds and producing it yourself, helps you pick up these sounds a lot, and then that helps your listening, and then when you listen, you can understand more, pick up more words, boost your
Yes,
confidence, and that would help out with your speaking as well. So they kind of both ways.
it reinforces
Hmm.
the listening. You know, I
Yeah.
think using the language reinforces the listening. You cannot do only one of the two. That's a mistake, and that mistake I made with Japanese, for example. And my
Yeah.
Japanese changed completely when I started actually uh, putting myself out there and trying to actually communicate in Japanese. Oh, look, I learned to communicate in Japanese when I started actually communicating in Japanese. What a surprise.
Yeah, I remember I think when I first started learning Cantonese before, maybe it was a few months in, maybe or 2 or 3 months in, I went to do my first lesson on italki.
Mhm.
And I said like some simple sentences like I've been learning Cantonese for like 2 months, or I've been learning Cantonese for 3 months or something. And then I think the teacher said something like, "Oh, do you like Hong Kong, or do you like something? Do you like Cantonese or something like that?" And I didn't know the word for like, and she just looked at me kind of a bit like, "Oh, really? You don't know that?" And I'm just like, she was a lovely teacher, but she was just kind of like a bit surprised because I said the first sentence, which would probably must have used some more. I think she asked me what did I do, and I was like, "Oh, I'm a chemical engineer," and I learned that word because it was what I did. And she said, "Oh, do you like this?" And I was just like, "What does this word mean?" And it was jungi, like, and it just completely flew over my head. And like, there's so many like filler words or just really common words that come up multiple times, like every conversation that I just didn't know because I just wasn't exposed to them or hadn't heard them.
Yeah, and they are not in textbooks. Pretty
Yeah,
simply. I mean,
and
Japanese, the Japanese that people actually use every day is completely different from the Japanese that you get in most textbooks. I think nowadays textbooks are trying to match
mhm.
actual Japanese much, much more than before. Before it was just almost laughable what you
Yeah,
would get from the textbooks.
I think a lot of the one like in Cantonese as well, they have like filler words and stuff. So in English, you'd use the word like. In
Like,
Cantonese, people can say like keisa, or in Japanese, you have like etto, anno, whatever. But I guess like these sorts of words as well, like that are very much a natural part of everyday speech, also just tend to not be included as well, and like
but
just loads of
you
stuff
know,
like that.
things like etto and ano, sometimes you get in the textbook, but what you never get is nanka, and that's
Like that.
almost more used than the other two. So yeah, before I understood what that nanka was, I really
Is
had
that is that the same meaning?
it's like
Okay. Okay.
oh well like or so.
Mm. Okay.
Etto is more like you know.
Because there was a Japanese girl in my class, and I remember on the first day, uh, like the teacher asked her a question. We were supposed to be only speaking Chinese, and she goes, "Hi." I was like, "Wait, you're supposed to be speaking Chinese." That's okay. This was months and months and months ago, so we were quite like low level at the time.
But imagine someone learning English and never getting exposed to like kinda, sort of, etc. And then all of a sudden listening to someone speaking English, and it's full of kinda and sort of you like, sort of kinda
Yeah,
like,
you know
you
what I
know.
mean. Whatever.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's impossible to understand.
I think another thing, especially with English as well, is like when people think of at least British English, a lot of people think you speak very proper and you speak like kind of like Benedict Cumberbatch, or like if you've seen like the Enola Holmes films or like Sherlock Holmes, or like it's
Yeah.
like really proper English and everyone pronounces everything properly, and we drink our tea and drink water and stuff like that. And then you go up to somewhere like Newcastle or Glasgow, and people are like, oh, they just sound completely different, and they use like all sorts of weird
Mimum.
language. So the accents are so strong as well. Yeah,
Isn't it Newcastle mimum means my mom?
yeah, yeah.
So,
Minimum, minimum. Yeah, And they have loads of Like I remember one of my mates, he was like I'd say film as in a movie, but he goes film or book and stuff instead of like book or film, and he just adds like random vowels in and stuff. And like with English as well, you get things like I want to go to the club. That sounds really strange. You kind of smash all the words together.
One.
It's like I want to go to the club. You kind of just if you were learning English, I bet that only sounds like one word, and this sort of like I guess in linguistics it's called connected speech.
Yep.
And
Connect.
like and every language has it. So I kind of think if you're not used to this, you can't even tell like when the word's starting and when the word's ending. It just sounds like a mess of sounds.
Yep.
And
There's connected speech and there's reduction as well. Reduction
yeah.
makes a big difference in English as well.
So what's
Like,
reduction?
like when you say for me, you don't say for me, you say for me, for me. So you all the or sound of the word for doesn't even get out.
Okay.
For me,
That's like just that bit like
for
drops off
me.
the end.
You have f schwa and then me. For me, you don't say for me unless you're speaking
That
very
sounds
clearly
very
and
posh or
posh. Exactly.
something.
For
Yeah.
me. So
Or
many
like you're
many
trying to
people
stress,
actually
it's
have.
like, oh, for me, I think, oh, you're trying to stress in a certain situation. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a real problem for many people to understand spoken English because of connected speech and because of reduction.
So yeah, I think going back to the topic you were talking about before, I think for something like Spanish, at least I found from fairly early on, if I just started watching like stuff in Spanish with Spanish subtitles, I can pick up a lot from the context. I can start to hear where the words start and where the words end, and I can tend to understand through context kind of really simple shows like the stuff like Extra, which is made for learners, and even then they speak a bit more clearly. But I can start to understand like sort of where words are starting and ending, and they sound like words. But with Cantonese, I remember like half a year in, I'd watch like a TV show, and the only words I'd be understanding would be like sorry and like
And
thank
I.
you, like I and stuff. And it's just
Yeah.
you think that it's just so it's goes over your head. But I really think it's kind of like you said, these things snowball. So I think the more you get used to it, when you get kind of past that first bridge where you can actually start understanding these sounds, from then the process of filling in the vocabulary is relatively easy. It's just a case of a lot and a lot and a lot of exposure over like a long period of time.
Yeah.
But it's at that first bit when it just all seems just like completely hopeless, you know?
Yeah.
Get
And
over
I
the
would
hood.
also add that the fact that if you simultaneously sometimes practice also speaking, you reinforce what you've received from the listening.
Yeah.
Some of the topics, I can talk about some topics in Japanese with much more confidence than other topics, just because I have talked about them with my tutors many times. So the vocabulary in that area has been reinforcing itself continuously.
Yeah. And that's the same with me in Mandarin. Like there's a lot of things now, like I can talk about quite a lot of things, like I tend to not run into too many communication problems when I'm speaking to people, at least now. But then every now and again someone asks me a question and I'm just kind of thinking, I don't know how to respond to this. Like I just don't have the words for it or something. And it's just normally it's more, at least now it's more like specific topics, like mostly to do with things like science and things. If I try to talk about stuff like that, a lot of the time I just don't have the words for it. But it's just a case of I've not actually watched or read as much to do with these topics yet. So it's just a case of if once I start doing that and practicing speaking to people about it, it's going to get like easier. But it's so broad and there's so many words. It's just going to take a
Yes.
long time.
But if a topic really interests you, you better do it. You better
Yeah.
schedule a lesson and try to talk about that topic. It's going to be really difficult the first time, but after 3 or 4 times, you're much more confident already.
And actually, one of my classmates in my last semester at the university, he was an American guy, but he studies something to do with biology at university, and he was really into science as well. So like, and because we were it's something that, like, when we were in Taiwan, you kind of meet and you only allowed to speak Chinese in class. So most of the time, even if their native language is English, after class we kind of just carried on speaking in Chinese and tried to like keep in the habit. And I'd always speak about science with him because we're both really interested in the topic, and sometimes with a teacher, and I got a lot better at speaking about sort of these science related topics, and even some of the words that I learned from like starting watching videos and things. Like I would learn a word, and then even like some of my native speaker friends wouldn't know it just because the word hasn't come up for them.
Yeah.
This is quite a funny feeling when you go, oh, it's this concept. So I think so some of the stuff I watched was quite like specialist. So I said the words entropy, which is probably may not have heard the word in English. It's just a concept in thermodynamics for like the degree of how like messy something is, or degree of chaos in something.
Yes.
And I said that word in Chinese, and she was just like, 什么意思？听不懂. It's like, but then she was the teacher, so I was like, oh fuck, I pronounced this wrong. And then like I showed it the character and look it up, and she goes,
still nothing.
从来没有看过这个字. I'm like, oh, really? It's interesting stuff. You should look it up.
Well, that has happened to me once in Mandarin as well. Even though my level was really, really like totally beginner level, but my job actually is BE. That's translator, but you usually don't use it so much in Mandarin, I was told. It's still a word. It's translated B from writing, I guess. But it's actually you use fai, I think, for interpret. So they use the same word for interpreter and translator, but the word translator, it exists. It's BE. So I was using it to answer very basic questions, and the tutor was like, what are you actually? But then when I showed them the characters, they would understand.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, and sometimes with Chinese, they have one word that describes two things. So like I think you said 翻译 is translator, interpreter, and translate or to interpret. It can be like a person or the action. And then things like a fridge, like 冰箱 is one word. It means fridge and freezer. And you ask them, which one do you want to put it in? The other say, put it in the top, meaning the freezer, or put it in the bottom, meaning the fridge. But I'm like, what if it's the other way around? You can, I don't know, it just seems like, why wouldn't you have a separate word for freezer? It just seems mental, but...
I don't know about you in England, but we here, sometimes we have the freezer above, and sometimes it's below, so...
Yeah. I mean,
it wouldn't really work.
The same in England. Actually, my freezer at home's in the bottom, yeah. Like, in my home in Birmingham, I'm from, my freezer's at the bottom, but here, where I live now, in Middlesbrough, it's at the top, so...
Confusing, to say the least.
Yeah. So that's a nightmare. Yeah. Trying to think, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think we've addressed many topics. I think that's kind of it, right?
Well, I guess one more thing about the listening comprehension thing, and this kind of is something that I personally have found really useful in, like, no matter what the language is that I just like finding videos on YouTube with like the CC captions. So you can get the hard-coded subtitles, which people would add before they upload the video, or you can get the ones in the website, so they kind of add it to the YouTube after they upload the video, in which case it's in the website.
Yeah.
If you find those sort of videos, you can then import it into something like Link, or you can just use, like, if it's Chinese or Japanese, you can actually look it up with a pop-up dictionary. Just hover your mouse above the word and it tells you what the English is. And you can do like that with Netflix as well by downloading add-ons. So just kind of finding these like native content that's authentic, that I like, and just kind of get used to just like listening with it. So I'd work through dialogues for maybe like half an hour a day, trying to like do these short but colloquial videos, and then just from there slowly kind of start trying to watch like more extensive exposure over my brain and see how that works.
Sounds great, and I understand why you progress so fast. It's actually really good. Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on the channel. I've really enjoyed our talk, and I'm sure we'll do it again at some point.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it too. Thanks.
Sure, we'll have lots of things to talk about as well, other topics we can explore. So if anyone has any topics or questions for me or Stefano, then leave them in the comment section below, and I can either answer them in the comments, or if it wants a video, I can invite Stefano back on and we can talk again sometime.
You're gonna come over to my channel.
So yeah, what's Stefano's space then? I'll post a link to his YouTube, IG, and everything, and I talk it down in the description box below. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.
Bye bye. Ciao.
Bye bye.